Sisqo had the biggest song in the world in 2000. Then he vanished. For almost a decade, nobody knew where he went. People assumed he retired. People assumed the money ran out. The truth was much darker. In 2026, at 47 years old, Sisqo finally said the name out loud. He named the executive he believes ended his career. He explained the rumors that followed him for 20 years. And he revealed what really happened the night one argument changed everything. What he held back for 2 decades is now coming out. And the story is uglier than fans ever guessed. Mark Althavan Andrews was born on November 9, 1978, in Baltimore, Maryland. The city was known for hard streets, close neighborhoods, and families who worked for everything they had. His father, Alonzo, worked as an electrician at PSI Net Stadium, and his mother, Carolyn, worked at a Social Security office. There was nothing glamorous about the household. No one had ties to the music industry, and nobody around him was preparing him for fame. He came from a blue-collar home where people earned their place the slow way. That matters, because the boy who would later become Sisqo started with none of the shortcuts people often imagine stars must have had. Music entered his life almost as soon as he could speak. He began singing around age 2, and by the time he was 7, people around him already knew there was something unusual in his voice. That became impossible to ignore when he joined his church's young adult choir and became its youngest member ever. For a child to earn a spot in an adult choir said a lot before he had even reached middle school. Those church years shaped him in a deep way. Gospel taught him control, feeling, and presence. Long before huge stages and flashing lights, he was learning how to move people with a voice that had already started to carry far beyond his age. He grew up at 908 Newington Avenue in Baltimore's Reservoir Hill neighborhood, close to Druid Hill Park. That detail sounds small at first, but it would stay with him. The streets, the people, the park, and the daily life around him all sank into his identity. Later, when the group needed a name that actually meant something, they would pull it straight from that world and call themselves Drew Hill. In that sense, his career never really began in a boardroom or a studio. It began right outside his front door, in the place where he lived, watched, listened, and slowly became himself. Then came one of those strange moments that only makes sense when you look back at it later. Before any record deal, before radio play, before anyone outside Baltimore knew their names, Sisqo was working at the Fudgery in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. So were Larry Jazz Anthony, James Woody Green, and Tamir Nokio Ruffin. The job was simple on paper. They sold fudge to tourists. Yet the store had a twist. Workers were expected to sing while making candy, turning an ordinary shift into a live show. Day after day, those 4 young men were building harmony in front of customers without fully knowing what they were preparing for. What looked like a teenage job became the place where a future R&B group found its sound. By high school, another part of his image had started to form. Sisqo graduated from Mergenthaler Vocational Technical High School in 1994. But one of the most important shifts happened earlier, during freshman year. A girl he liked broke his heart. She had platinum blonde hair, and after the breakup, he dyed his own hair blonde because he wanted to become somebody different. That choice stayed with him. His label disliked the look at first, yet he kept it. Soon, it became one of the most recognizable parts of his public image. It also led to rumors and judgment that followed him for years. Even so, he refused to blend in. That decision said something lasting about him. He was willing to carry the cost of standing out. By 1992, the pieces were starting to come together. Sisqo, Woody, Nokio, and Jazz got serious about becoming a group. And the bond they had built at the Fudgery now had direction. They were not manufactured by executives looking for a trend. They came from the same city, the same local world, and they had already spent real time singing together in front of real people. That gave them something polished acts often lacked. Their chemistry felt lived in. When they chose the name Drew Hill, drawn from Druid Hill Park in their neighborhood, it made the group feel even more rooted. The name carried Baltimore with it. So did the sound. That grounding mattered when Drew Hill stepped into the wider industry. By the time they reached Island Records in 1996, they were not stepping forward as strangers thrown together for a campaign. They were already a working unit, and it showed. Their debut single, Tell Me, did not explode overnight, but it rose steadily and proved there was something real here. The song reached number 18 on the Billboard Hot 100, climbed to number 5 on the Billboard R&B chart, and even hit number 30 on the UK singles chart. That was enough to signal that they had more than local appeal. Then In My Bed arrived in 1997 and pushed them further. It reached number 1 on the US R&B chart for 3 straight weeks and climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. 2 major hits from a debut album changed the conversation around them fast. Success kept building, and with it came bigger expectations. In 1998, Drew Hill released Enter the Drew, and the album moved more than 2.15 million copies in the United States alone. It became one of the year's biggest albums and showed that the group was not fading after a promising start. The lead single, How Deep Is Your Love, featuring Redman, was released on September 20, 1998. It spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the US R&B chart and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, the highest Hot 100 peak of their career. Its placement on the Rush Hour soundtrack brought their music to an even wider audience. Suddenly, they were connected to one of the biggest films of the year, and people who may not have been following R&B were now hearing Drew Hill too. Everything looked strong from the outside, but inside the group, the balance was beginning to shift. That shift centered on Sisqo. As Drew Hill reached its commercial peak, Def Soul Records, the Def Jam subsidiary run by L.A. Reid, began pursuing him for a solo deal. That detail says a lot. The label was not trying to sign the whole group again in a new way. They were coming specifically for Sisqo. He stood out through energy, acrobatic stage movement, and a huge vocal range that made it hard for anyone in the industry to ignore him. Over time, that kind of attention changes a group, even before anyone says it out loud. A fork had opened in the road, and sooner or later, someone was going to walk through it. Sisqo's solo debut, Unleash the Dragon, arrived on November 30th, 1999, during a pause in Drew Hill's group activity. From the beginning, the album made it clear that he had no interest in being boxed into one lane. It mixed up tempo tracks with ballads and leaned into a bigger personality than the one listeners already knew. The gamble worked. The album reached number 2 on the Billboard 200, which was a huge result for a debut solo R&B album by someone still closely tied to a successful group. He was no longer just the standout member of Drew Hill. He was becoming a full event on his own. Part of what made the album feel wider than expected was the range of material. One surprise was his cover of Enchantment Passing Through, a song written by Elton John and Tim Rice for their Aida project from 1996, which later became a Broadway musical in 2000. For a lot of R&B listeners, this was their first encounter with that song. Sisqo used it to show that his voice could move through different worlds without losing its identity. The choice felt unusual for a young artist trying to break big in pop and R&B, which may be exactly why it helped. It told people early that he wanted room to do more than the obvious thing. Then came the track that changed everything. Thong Song has one of the wildest backstories in the whole album, producers Tim Kelly and Bob Robinson, known as Tim and Bob, had originally made the track with Michael Jackson in mind. The music drew from Wes Montgomery's cover of Eleanor Rigby, and somehow the demo reached Sisqo. The moment he heard those opening strings, he wanted it. He even brought in Bruce Dukoff, a violinist who had worked on Star Wars, to rewrite and re-record the strings. By the time Sisqo finished shaping it, the song no longer felt like a leftover idea meant for someone else. It felt built for him, loud and strange and unforgettable, in a way only a few records ever manage. The album's numbers soon turned huge. Unleash the Dragon was later certified 6 times platinum by the RIAA in 2003, representing 6 million copies shipped in North America alone. Global sales estimates pushed toward 5.6 million in tracked markets. It also ranked number 27 on the year-end album chart for 1999, even though it had only been released at the very end of November. That meant it made that kind of impact in barely a month. Those sales were not just good. They were explosive, and they confirmed that Sisqo had crossed out of group success and into his own level of stardom. Still, one of the most interesting details about that era is that Thong Song, the record most people remember first, was not actually his highest charting single. Released on December 31st, 1999, it climbed to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 by May and June 2000. The true number 1 came from Incomplete, released on June 13, 2000. Written by Montel Jordan and produced by Anthony Shep Crawford, the song topped both the Billboard Hot 100 and the Hot R&B Hip-Hop Singles and Tracks chart. That mattered because it showed Sisqo had more than a novelty smash. He could deliver the huge dance record everyone talked about, and he could also deliver the emotional ballad that reached the top. Yet while fame was rising, trouble was already growing inside the success story. Thong Song had a legal problem buried in it from the start. At the end of each verse, Sisqo sang the phrase "because she was livin' la vida loca," lifting a line from Ricky Martin's 1999 hit, "Livin' la vida loca." That lyric was written by Desmond Child, which meant clearance had to be handled before release. Producers Tim and Bob had warned Sisqo about that. They understood the risk and flagged it early. But the clearance did not get done in time, and the song still came out. According to producer Bob Robinson, Sisqo brushed off the concern and acted like it was no big problem. He reportedly said he had a relationship with Desmond Child and that it could be handled with a phone call. Nobody at Def Jam's licensing side stopped the release either. That let the mistake pass every checkpoint. By the time the issue came into full view, the song had already become a worldwide smash. At that stage, it was too big to quietly fix. The record was everywhere, and the legal exposure was now attached to one of the most visible songs in the world. Ricky Martin's team responded with legal pressure, and the case moved toward a settlement. Rather than fight a drawn-out court battle, Sisqo's side settled out of court. That decision changed the ownership of the song in a major way. Desmond Child, who had co-written Livin' La Vida Loca with Draco Rosa, ended up with the largest publishing stake in Thong Song. Producer Bob Robinson later said plainly that Desmond Child had more ownership of the song than anyone else. That meant the biggest checks from one of Sisqo's most famous records were not flowing mainly to the performer whose image and voice were attached to it forever. The damage did not stop there. Because of the settlement, Sisqo ended up with only a minority share of the profits from a song that continued generating money through radio, streaming, licensing, and public memory. Then another money fight appeared years later. In 2015, Sisqo sued royalty collection company 27 Red Music, claiming it had collected more than $600,000 in publishing royalties owed to him from 1996 to 2005 and kept the money. He also asked for another $3 million in punitive damages. When you put those pieces together, the biggest song of his career becomes a strange story of victory mixed with loss. It made him a star on one side and cost him heavily on the other. What stands out even more is how openly he later spoke about it. In the Vice documentary The Story of, Sisqo did not spend his energy blaming everybody around him. He admitted they had to take the loss and said they paid up, and that everybody who had something to do with it got their piece of the song. That kind of honesty was rare. It gave the moment a human weight. Behind the flashy image and loud success was a man admitting that one uncleared lyric had changed the financial future of a record that still lives on. After a breakout that huge, the next move carried enormous pressure. Sisqo released Return of Dragon on June 19, 2001, exactly 2 years after Unleash the Dragon had started changing his life. The album went platinum, which would have been a major achievement for many artists, but the standard around Sisqo had changed. Can I Live and Dance for Me never became the kind of crossover event that Thong Song had been. Without that one song capable of flooding radio and pop culture at the same time, the album faded more quietly than people expected. This is where the second album curse started to feel real. The numbers were not terrible, but the momentum had cooled. And in the music business, that difference can be brutal. After Sisqo released Return of Dragon in 2001, his place in the mainstream did not simply fade on its own. In his telling, it was cut off. He has said that after a serious clash with Def Jam executive Lyor Cohen, the mood around him changed fast and quietly. There was no public statement and no clear warning. Still, doors started closing. Radio support weakened. Industry backing dried up. People who once wanted to work with him seemed to step back at the same time. Years later, when he tried to mount a real comeback, he had to release Last Dragon through his own label, Dragon Music, because the big system that once helped build him no longer wanted him near it. That matters, because it changes the whole way his story looks. From the outside, it was easy to assume he had simply fallen out of fashion after the early 2000s. Sisqo has pushed back on that idea for years. He has said he was blackballed, and that word carries a very different weight. It suggests a career that was not just cooling off, but being quietly contained. In his view, the industry did not need to announce anything. It only needed the right people to decide he was finished, and the rest would follow the signal. As that wall formed around him, another problem began to spread through the background. Sisqo has said false rumors about his sexuality were pushed as a punishment tool after his conflict with label power brokers. He did not describe them as random gossip that happened to catch fire. He described them as something used against artists when they stopped playing along. In the world of early 2000s R&B, that kind of rumor could do serious damage all by itself. It could make radio nervous. It could weaken brand interest. It could make fans look at an artist through a new lens before the artist even had a chance to respond. What made it hit harder was how well it attached itself to his image. Sisqo had a look people could not ignore. His platinum blonde hair made him stand out right away, and during his rise it helped turn him into a visual force. Then, the same image started working against him. He later argued that the hair was never the real issue because other artists had made bold style choices before him without getting the same treatment. What changed, in his view, was the intent behind the conversation. The look stayed the same, but the story built around it turned darker. What had once made him iconic became something others could twist into a label and keep repeating. The rumor campaign also kept running into a reality that should have made it fall apart. Sisqo had a long-term partner, Elizabeth Pham. and the two built a family together well before their 2018 marriage. They had daughters Shayone and Kimiko, and a son, Ryu. Even with that visible family life, the whispers stayed alive across the 2000s. That says a lot about how these stories work once they get enough force behind them. They are not easy to kill because answering them can make them louder, while ignoring them can make people think silence means weakness. For Sisqo, it became a trap that followed him year after year. That helps explain why his disappearance felt so total to fans. From roughly 2002 through 2010, a lot of people assumed he had simply vanished or retired. The truth was less dramatic and more frustrating. He kept working, he kept writing, he kept recording. At one point, he said he had stockpiled millions of songs. The problem was visibility. Without strong label support, without radio push, and without the money needed to keep an artist in front of the public, all that work lived in the shadows. His single, Can I Live, charted far below the heights of Thong Song, and once the label saw those weaker numbers, it had an excuse to pull resources even faster. What remained in public view were scattered appearances, including reality television. For a singer who had once been one of the brightest names in pop and R&B, that was a sharp fall. Still, he did not stop trying to rebuild. In February 2015, Sisqo released Last Dragon, his first solo album in 14 years. The project was meant to close the Dragon trilogy he had started with Unleash the Dragon in 1999 and continued with Return of Dragon in 2001. By then, the music world had changed around him. Streaming was shaping the market. Younger artists were driving the conversation. Sisqo admitted he felt pressure returning at that point in his life. And he also said the album had been rebuilt more than once, because earlier versions already sounded old by the time he was ready to release them. Even without major radio backing, the album meant something important. It showed that he was not treating himself like a relic. He was still trying to make a real return. Around that same period, he also became more open about what he believed had happened behind the curtain. During the Last Dragon press run, he spoke more plainly about label politics, executive gatekeeping, and the way an artist can be slowly cut off without the public ever seeing the machinery. He said rumors that he was hard to work with spread through the business and helped choke off access to promotion and radio. That gave his story a harder edge. It was no longer just the tale of an artist chasing one more hit. It was the story of someone trying to explain why the road had been blocked in the first place. Through all of this, Dru Hill became his lifeline. The group kept touring and performing through the 2010s, and that work kept him active, paid, and present in front of loyal fans. The mainstream spotlight was smaller now, but the crowds still came. On nostalgia lineups and overseas shows, Dru Hill still had value, and Sisqo remained the central draw. That group setting gave him something the solo machine had stopped giving him: momentum, income, and proof that people still cared when he stepped on stage. It also helped keep the Dragon identity alive even when the wider music press had mostly moved on. Years later, he found a new kind of stage through The Masked Singer. In early 2024, Sisqo appeared on the show as Lizard. He performed Evanescence's Bring Me to Life and made it to the Group C finals before being eliminated and unmasked. The reveal carried more weight than a simple television moment. It reminded viewers that the voice was still there, the tone was still there, the energy was still there. After the mask came off, he performed Thong Song in the full costume and even hit a cartwheel, showing that he could still command a room with the same mix of vocals and showmanship that helped make him a star in the first place. That moment seems to have hit him personally, too. After spending so many years stuck in a strange space between fame and invisibility, he was suddenly standing in front of a crowd reacting to him in real time. Not to an old headline, not to a rumor, not to a meme, to him. He later suggested that the experience reminded him people still respected his voice. And that reminder pushed him to think more seriously about making new music, instead of living only inside the old catalog. Then, in 2023, he gave one of the clearest public explanations of his past when he named Leor Cohen directly in a Vlad TV interview. For more than 2 decades, fans had heard hints about a powerful executive who allegedly helped freeze his career after his peak years. By finally saying the name on camera, Sisqo tied his post-2001 collapse to a specific clash instead of letting it remain a mystery. In the same conversation, he returned to the rumor issue and said those stories were part of a wider pattern in the music business, where damaging personal narratives could be used to pressure artists or punish them when they pushed back. He also spoke about another part of the fallout that mattered to him deeply. After success came, he wanted to bring people from Baltimore into his world. He wanted dancers, stylists, and crew from his own community to share in the opportunities around him. According to Sisqo, that move was not welcomed by everyone in the label system. What he saw as loyalty and giving back could be read inside the machine as resistance, control, or disobedience. Over time, even choices rooted in home and trust were folded into the larger story that he was difficult. Money problems only made the long aftermath worse. In 2023, Sisqo filed a lawsuit against 27 Red Music, the company he had hired to collect publishing royalties from 1996 to 2005. He alleged that around $600,000 connected to Thong Song and other catalog royalties had been collected but never properly passed on to him. He is also seeking punitive damages. That lawsuit added another painful layer to his story because it suggested the damage was not only about lost momentum and damaged reputation. It was also about money that should have reached him years earlier, during a period when every dollar mattered. And that financial pressure sat right beside his family life. His relationship with Elizabeth Pham stretched back to the early 2000s, long before their quiet 2018 wedding in Minnesota. By the time they married, they had already built a life together and raised children through years that were far less glamorous than the outside world imagined. Sisqo has described that relationship as something that held during the low seasons, when big labels were gone, budgets were thinner, and survival mattered more than image. That makes the marriage feel less like the beginning of a love story and more like the formal recognition of one that had already endured the hardest parts. Fatherhood changed the emotional shape of his journey too. His children grew up seeing a very different version of their father than the public did at the height of his fame. The flashy image from the Thong Song era suggested endless momentum and endless money. Real life was much more fragile. There were lawsuits, business problems, missed chances, and stretches when work meant being away and hustling to stay afloat. Sisqo has spoken about the guilt that can come with that kind of instability, especially when survival starts taking up the space where family moments should live. Those losses do not show up on charts, but they leave deep marks. The strange part is that all of this happened around music that carried massive cultural value. Thong Song was not a small hit. It drove sales, touring, licensing, television use, and years of public memory. Yet even with that kind of success, Sisqo's personal wealth never fully matched the scale of what the music generated around him. He has spoken about publishing disputes, ownership problems, and the reality that labels, publishers, and middlemen can keep collecting long after the artist has lost control of the machine. For someone who reached huge heights so young, that lesson came hard and late. That youth matters. When Thong Song exploded in 2000, Sisqo was barely into adulthood. Just a few years earlier, he had been working ordinary jobs in Baltimore. Then suddenly he was flying around the world, shooting major videos, and performing in front of huge crowds. The speed of that rise left very little room to understand the deeper business before it was already shaping his future. By the time he fully grasped issues like masters, publishing splits, recoupment, and executive power, the consequences were already unfolding. So when he looks back now, one of the moments he keeps returning to is that clash with Lyor Cohen. He has framed it as his biggest mistake, not because it created every problem on its own, but because it taught him how brutal the power structure could be when youth, ego, anger, and hierarchy all meet in one room. There is regret in how he talks about it now, but there is also clarity. He understands how one heated moment can bend the next decade of a life. And now, after all those years of fallout, silence, side roads, and slow rebuilding, Sisqo appears to be shaping a new chapter with much more intention. In 2026, he is scheduled to perform at Houston's Toyota Center as part of the R&B Lovers Tour, alongside Keith Sweat, Joe, Genuine, and Cut Close. That matters because it places him back on a major arena stage more than 25 years after his solo breakthrough. For a lot of people, he had become frozen in one early 2000s image. Yet here he is, still drawing crowds large enough to fill serious venues. At the same time, he has spoken about plans for a Drew Hill Las Vegas residency, with Excalibur mentioned as a likely home. That idea fits his image almost too well. The dragon identity has followed him for decades, from Unleash the Dragon through Last Dragon, and a venue tied to fantasy and spectacle gives that branding a fresh kind of life. What once worked as a pop image could now work as a full live experience, something theatrical and lasting. He is also framing his new music through a three-part arc called Genesis, Exodus, and Revelations. Even the titles tell you how he wants this chapter to feel. He is not just dropping songs. He is telling a story about origin, movement, and return. He has said Exodus represents leaving his old self behind and evolving as an artist, while Revelations is planned as the final chapter. It is a careful structure, and it shows that he is thinking in bigger themes again. That same thinking is there in his decision to reunite with Maya for Exodus. She is the only feature on the project, and that choice feels deliberate. Their history goes back to the late 1990s, when he wrote and appeared on her debut single. Bringing her back now creates a full-circle moment, but it also does something more useful. It ties his comeback to a real musical connection from the era that first made him famous, while still letting the new work stand as something current rather than purely nostalgic.